Leah Silber, and I go way back to the early engine yards. She also has co-organized several conference events, so I feel like we have this sort of kindred spirit of like empathy, of like, I've been there, I know. It's like you meet someone who like fought in the trenches but different trenches. That's sort of this. And Leah was, like Eli was saying, the first conf I didn't really have any idea that there was going to be more than one, so it was just called Farmhouse Conf. It wasn't Farmhouse Conf 1 or 2010. And I didn't really have any like pull or like any clout or I didn't have any like reach, right? So I just called in markers from friends, and then I kind of tweeted about it a little bit, and 30 people bought tickets to hang out in my backyard for the day. And Leah was one of those friends that was kind enough to come down, and I believe she sat in that while she gave her talk.
Can I sit in it again?
Totally. The chairs last time were more, or I'm sorry, first time were more like focused to the here. By the way, everyone who's standing back there are some derelict chairs here and there and abouts, and we could add more seating so you don't have to stand all day. There's also empty chairs if you're not afraid of Julia Mae West.
There's one right here too. Right in the front.
Devin, Aki. All kinds of chairs if you want to stand, but if you want to sit, but if you want to stand, that's fine too. So Leah Silber, woo!
Yeah.
So when thinking about coming here, I ran into the same problem that I ran into last time, which is that this is really a casual, fun conference where people tell stories, and I don't so much have any stories. There are a lot of friends in the audience, and I'll go out with them, and Aaron will tell many jokes, and Evan will argue with Yehuda, and they'll all bite each other's heads off, and I'll quietly sit and like divvy up the check so everybody has everything in order. So I'm glad that the laughs per minute went down. But I didn't go back and watch my talk from the first conference because that would be horrible. I have not reached a level of comfort where that is at all okay. But I did sit down and think about what do I have a perspective on now that I didn't have a perspective on then. And so just to fill in a little bit, what I talked about back then was open source communities in general and my strategies for how to build them, how to run them, how to be a company involved in them, and all of that. And I stand by most of what I said nowadays, now much wiser. But there are sort of different areas that I have shed light since that I sort of didn't even realize were elements. And one of them is what I'm sure many of you have heard, if not talked about yourself, but which is the role of the benevolent dictator for life in an open source project. Basically, when you have an open source project, it's started by someone, it's started by a small group of someone's, and all the people who sort of come along are attracted to something that they saw that those people created. And what people oftentimes forget in projects that are not successful is that they really had a solid vision at that point for what they were creating, what it was going to contribute, how it was going to function. And it becomes problematic, obviously, as a project grows to maintain that vision. And so you will end up with some sort of leader or small group of leaders, and there are bad ways to do it, and good ways to do it, and better ways to do it. And one of the things that I've gained a lot of perspective on, though I don't know how many of them I could cram into 5 minutes, is that it is what some of the right ways to do it are. And basically also what some of the wrong ways to do it are. But it's important that you maintain the fact that there be people who have the big picture. And that doesn't always happen naturally, and it's something that you have to sort of work on. And there's a couple ways to do it. And option one is I am the king of my project or queen of my project. I will review all commits. I will be in charge of all major decisions. I will make sure that everything passes through me so that nothing bad passes through. And while that, in theory, makes sense, it creates a huge bottleneck and really stifles the growth of a project. Another option is that you have a small, we're sort of climbing the spectrum from terrible to, I think, possibly the best thing that I've come across. But sort of in the middle of it is you have a small group of lieutenants, and they each have their own sort of little, I want to call it fiefdom, even though that obviously imparts that I think that it is not the right way to do it, but that's how it tends to be. And for example, in Rails, one of the things that DHH has done right is that he has not been okay with, okay, Aaron, you're in charge of active record, this person, you are in charge of that, right? He sort of insisted that everybody have a larger perspective on what's going on. I don't have intimate details of how he does this and if it is nice, but this is the way it happens. And then the last way to do it, which is sort of one that I am a fan of, is basically you still have this small group not person, and they maintain this larger vision, but they have delegation. And in this group of people to whom they delegate, there is cross-training, I guess is what I would say. It's not like you own this, you own that, you own this. And many of the projects that I witness have meetings every week, and it's sort of like I will jump in and talk about some of the code, even though I am the marketing person, but I might talk about like how it's affecting my situation, that the docs don't generate a certain way, and I might jump in and talk about some political thing that's going on with what gets merged as it relates to a conference, and the guys amongst themselves in the project I'm thinking of right now, there are only guys other than myself, and the guys amongst themselves will talk about their different areas. They will cross boundaries. The important thing for this group of people is that they maintain this big picture, and one of the ways that you really can do this is by you have to actually work hard to have this larger perspective, I guess is what I should say. And so one of the projects that I work on these days is Ember, and the people who are in this small group don't just work on Ember. They work on Ember, they do consulting work, they do training work, they do all these things that sort of allow them to have the holistic perspective of everything from the guy at the bottom who's learning to the major company who needs to do XYZ. I referenced DHH before and something he does right, and one of the things that I think he does wrong, and this is a key point for me because I probably didn't realize this 4 or 5 years ago, was that he is a little bit too focused on his own personal use case. And he's been very public about saying, like, if this is not good for Basecamp, it is not good for Rails, or that is not a direct quote, to be clear, but that is the sentiment of the quotes. The 5 years ago, Leah was working for, at the time, Engine Yard, and we were sort of trying to get our groups into the Rails community in a very positive way. We wanted to help, we wanted to do a lot, and I think the perspective at that point was like, we really want to own as much of this as possible. Versus nowadays, on the project that I work on, we spend a lot of time and effort getting other companies to be invested and to also own pieces and parts. So not like a core team where everybody works for one company, but a core team where it might be 3 or 4 or 5. And that feels a little bit scary because you're giving up a lot of control. And to be honest, if I had like a lot of time to give a talk like this, it would probably be called something about the role of ego in an open source project, where it's helpful, where it's not, and sort of tackle it from that perspective. But the diversification of the core team of a project is very important to, again, having that holistic perspective and making sure that you're not just like honed in on your use case and ignoring other people. And I guess the collapse angle is, if you do this the wrong way, your project will collapse. And I'm not saying at all that Rails will collapse, but I think that it's a great example of a project that's in a somewhat precarious position. And there are lots of people who think that it's not really covering their use cases anymore or following the path that they would like it to fall. And I feel like if Rails were to fail, it would be a spectacular collapse. It will take lots of time, but yeah, I think there are many things that you could do. I'm specifically right now just talking about the like formation of your core team, but there are many things that you could do to help have a healthy, growing open source project. It's something I care about, it's something I do all the time. I hope in my few minutes I've given you some wisdom worth taking home, but I'm happy to talk more about it if any of you are interested.
Thank you.